Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for our Humana's February Lunch and Learn. I am Julie Brown. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director here at Humana. And I'm joined today by Jess Cosentino, Hawk Watcher, Humana board member, and recent marketing committee chair. We are thrilled to welcome Chad Witko today. He's the Senior Coordinator of Avian Biology at National Audubon. And we are going to be learning about Audubon's impressive bird migration programs, which do an excellent job of painting a picture of bird distribution and movements across the Americas. So I'm excited to learn more about it. Before we get started, I will just touch on a couple things about our program today. As usual, we are recording, like we do all our Lunch and Learn presentations, and we are live streaming on our Facebook page, so you can view any of our Lunch and Learn programs afterwards on our Facebook page or on our website. You just need to scroll down to our What's New section on Humana's homepage. It usually takes us sometimes up to a week to get those presentations up, but you can go back and visit any of our past Lunch and Learns. If you need to adjust your display on your screen, you could do that by clicking the view options up top. And we have disabled the audio and video for everybody today and found that that's the best way to reduce distractions during the talks. But even though everybody's muted, we really love connecting with all of you. So we encourage you to use the chat and ask questions, make comments. Jess is going to be reading your questions to Chad at the end of the program. And we love hearing where you're joining from and what you're up to. So feel free to type in what Hawk Watch you're tuning in from. I'm currently in Florida, so I usually have a wintry scene behind me with lots of winter birds and pine siskins at my feeder, but I have instead I have frigate birds and pelicans today, so that's kind of a nice change. If you don't already receive our e-newsletter, we send that out a couple times a month, and that's a great way to just stay up to date with what's going on at Humana, upcoming Lunch and Learns and tours and events and things. So you can just add your name and email address in the chat, and I'm happy to add you. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jess so he can introduce Chad.
Sure. Chad Witko is the Senior Coordinator of Avian Biology for the National Audubon Society's Migratory Bird Initiative. Before working at Audubon to help secure the future of migratory birds in the Western Hemisphere, Chad worked on various avian research, conservation, and education projects across the United States since working for Project Puffin in 2004. A lifelong birder with strong bird identification and distribution knowledge, Chad serves as an eBird reviewer for Windham, Vermont. As an ornithologist, he is most interested in migration, patterns of vagrancy, and seabirds. As a birder, Chad believes in community engagement and is the founder of the Antioch Bird Club. He currently lives in southeastern Vermont with his partner and daughter. And with that, I will turn it over to Chad.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jess, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me today. And thank you, everyone, for coming and spending your afternoon learning about Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative and our Bird Migration Explorer. I think it's going to be a wonderful presentation, and I hope that by the end of it, you feel a little more comfortable with some of the work that we're doing, especially with how you can utilize it in your own lives as birders or conservation advocates. So let me begin here. So here's the agenda for today's call. Today's call is going to be broken up into about 3 main areas. These will include the presentation itself, so a slide presentation that you're viewing, where I'll go over Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative as an overview, kind of where it came from and what it does. We'll also talk about the Bird Migration Explorer, which is one of our flagship programs and things we've been working on for the last few years. And of course, we'll do a demo of the Explorer at the end. I think it'll be a great way for you to see how to utilize this program, and will really kickstart your own explorations moving forward. And then for any time at the end that we have remaining, we'll of course do some Q&A. So let's talk about the Migratory Bird Initiative, and let's talk about the justification of why this program came about. It is a newer program, of course, so for many folks familiar with Audubon, this is still kind of under the radar. So our migratory birds are being lost at an alarming rate. Nearly 3/4 of bird species in the US and Canada are migratory, and recent science tells us that we've lost roughly 1 out of every 4 North American migratory birds since 1970. That's about 2.5 billion birds that are migratory, and about 3 billion total lost in the last 50 years. As we know from our own climate science at Audubon, that the future isn't looking bright for many of these same migratory species. So here's just a quick overview of some of that science I was talking about. The main paper that describes this 3 billion birds lost is the Rosenberg paper from Science back in 2019. Nearly 30% of birds have disappeared from our landscape since 1970. That's within my entire lifetime, and probably within the lifetime for many of the folks on this call. And then Audubon's own Survival by Degrees was released in 2019. This report detailed how 389 species of birds are on the brink of extinction or some major form of range shift due to climate change without any action as we could see it. So these are the sciences that kind of drive some of Audubon's justification for the Migratory Bird Initiative. So why study migratory birds in the first place? Well, they tell us about the health of our environment, not only where we live, but across the hemisphere. We've heard this before, that our birds are the proverbial canary in the coal mine. They're effective ecosystem indicators. They respond rapidly to environmental change. They're also, compared to other organisms, pretty easily studied. They're visible. We can count them in migration. They're invisible migration, such as hawk sites. We can do point counts and listen to them. So because they respond so rapidly to this change, and we can study them pretty effectively, we can learn a lot about our environment. And one of the things that we've learned about is that if you take care of birds, you've likely taken care of most of the big problems of the world. So we believe that by protecting birds in the places they need, we also protect the places that people and other wildlife rely on. Clean water, air, wild spaces, these things all benefit birds, of course, but also wildlife other than birds and humans alike. So more than half of the migratory species that we see in our own communities spend more than half of the year outside the US. We often have this bias that these are our birds, but these birds really are hemispheric. So protect them, we need to work across these borders that fulfill these geographic areas and the hemisphere. And we need to address the challenges they face not only in the breeding grounds and the non-breeding grounds, but also within their migration routes. So in this example shown here, taken from the Bird Migration Explorer, we have Swainson's hawks, which are a familiar raptor from the American West. Now, these birds breed throughout the American West. They're very familiar for many folks who go out hawk watching out there. But of course, if you've ever visited a hawk watch in Mexico or Central America, you know that they use this narrow corridor to form large migratory flocks before streaming down into South America, down to places like Argentina and the Pampas, where they complete one of the longest migrations for any raptor in the Western Hemisphere. Now, there's a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, we believe at the Migratory Bird Initiative that it really does take a hemisphere to protect our migratory birds. So we need to work together across boundaries and borders. Thankfully, advances in migration science and technology are helping us understand bird migration in new ways to achieve impactful conservation. Now, part of this stems from new technology and analyses, which allows us to track increasingly smaller species, such as this red-eyed vireo. Now, this helps us illuminate these migrations for these types of birds for the first time. Raptors, on the other hand, they've been around a long time in the tracking world. You know, they're larger birds, so they've been tracked with more older technologies that have been around a bit. They can handle those types of technologies. But birds like this red-eyed vireo, 20 years ago, can never have any type of technology small enough to study them. So by including these smaller species, more species, it helps us better understand migration as a whole throughout the hemisphere and to achieve impactful conservation. So new studies are published nearly daily. One of my main jobs is to discover these studies and to see if we can take that data into our initiative. But the thing is that these studies aren't usually accessible to people outside academia or scientific agencies. They're not readily available to the public. And even working for a nonprofit such as Audubon, these technologies and these data sometimes are nearly inaccessible. So by taking in these new types of data, we can reveal new insights. So data synthesis reveals new insights about our world. So in this example here on the screen, we see the exposure of blackpoll warblers, a fantastic migrant, to the disorienting nighttime lights that they experience during spring migration. Here you can see the exposure to light pollution across the United States and Canada in mid-May. So this comes from our conservation challenge maps, which are on the Explorer, which combine weekly bird distribution and abundance data with the footprint of human activities to show where, when, and how extensively these birds are exposed throughout the year to these challenges. These kinds of in-depth data are giving us valuable information for evaluating the impacts of human activities on these birds. Now that's a mouthful. So to say it more simply, by visualizing the scale of the problem, it helps us understand the scale of the solution. So where does the Migratory Bird Initiative come into all this? So Audubon's Migratory Bird Initiative was launched in the fall of 2018 with a vision of securing the future of migratory birds in the Western Hemisphere. To do so, there are four main things that we are working on, four fronts. These include identifying the places that migratory birds need to thrive across the Americas. Obviously, that's a big one. We need to protect these places that matter most. We need to reduce the threats wherever possible. And just like this call is showing, we need to engage people in the wonder of migration. So these are kind of the four main fronts that we're working on within MBI. So to do this work, the Migratory Bird Initiative consolidates millions, literally millions of data points shared by hundreds of scientists and institutions to reveal the most complete understanding of where, when, and how we need to act across the hemisphere to protect these species. So how do we do this? Well, we did this through extraordinary partnership among science, conservation, and technology organizations, and of course, the hundreds of scientists, institutions, and agencies that contributed data. On this matrix that you see in front of you, there's a grid, and the top 9 logos that you see are the logos for our 9 founding partners. The bottom 3, these are the organizations that we worked with that helped us on the technology side. So they helped us take what we were putting together and make the Explorer what it is today. So I'm going to talk to you next about the data types that we bring into the Migratory Bird Initiative, data that is used in not only our Bird Migration Explorer, but our conservation applications. And as I go across the screen, you're going to see new technologies coming in. But before we get into the technology types, I do want to point out what you see here with the dots and the lines. So above each technology type, you're going to see these points and lines, which help represent kind of visualize the data that we take in, showing, birds going from point A to point B. Those are the points, and then the lines in between. So a straight line indicates that we actually don't know the pathways that these birds took, whereas a curved line would kind of indicate that we can, decipher with more precision the exact pathways that birds are taking along the way. So here we have an example of banding data. We've listed point A and point B. Those are just hypothetical locations. But say, for instance, you band a bird in upstate New York. That's point A. That bird is later re-encountered at point B, say in Florida. And so we know where that bird was at those two places. We don't know where that bird went in between, and we can only kind of decipher a straight line connecting those 2 points. So that's kind of how this visualization will work as we go across. The other thing to note is that the thickness of the line, the thickness of the points kind of indicate how precise the data is. Obviously, with banding, we know exactly where that bird was encountered because we were in that location when that happened. And so we'll go across and you'll see this as it comes in. So banding data is a huge one. Banding data is a major component of the work that we do. Next are genetic data. We don't have a lot of it, but we do have some genetic data that's come in, genetic marker data, such as with this Wilson's warbler. Again, we know where that bird maybe was encountered, where tissue samples were taken from, feather samples, and we can decipher, which genetic population that bird originates, but maybe not the exact location. Next, we have automated radio telemetry. Think of Modus. Here we have a prothonotary warbler with a nano tag on it. Now, Modus, we can sometimes create kind of pathways from where that bird was moving, but really it's just kind of like banding. You're getting a bird flying by a station, it's pinging the tower. These are indicated by the orange dots. So you're kind of getting a location in the various places that the towers are. And so we can kind of infer a pathway, but we don't really know the pathway that the bird takes in between. Now, there are things like GPS tags, such as what's on here on the Swainson's hawk, PTT tags. There's other types of tags out there. Many of them can be very precise, down to just a few meters. And so we have a very thin line here, and we have a curved line because we can actually see the pathways that these birds are taking along the journey. And then one of the final data types that we take in are from light level geolocators. These are tiny tags, a little bit bigger than the nano tags for Modus. And all they are is just a light logging device. And through the light data that comes in, scientists can do some analyses and basically triangulate where on the Earth the bird is at a given time based on how long of daylight it's exposed to, as well as things like solar noon. It's very imprecise. It can have a precision of dozens, if not several hundred kilometers, but it is an important piece of the equation for the work that scientists do and organizations such as ourselves. So these are the main data types that we take in. So what we do is we consolidated that data for 458 species. We've not really worked with seabirds yet, and there's some reasons why logistically. But for the 458 migratory species we've taken in, here's the main types and broken down into kind of categories. So tracking data, GPS, PTT, we've taken over 9,000 individual birds data into our systems, and that represents 187 species. Here you can see a map of American white pelicans. You can see the pathways that these birds have taken based on satellite tags. Next, we take in connectivity data, which includes banding data, Modus, genetics. These are the data where we have point A, point B, but not anything in between. We have a lot of data that's come in this way. Over 4 million connections are in our system through this, many of which, of course, are banding data. And many more species have been taken in this way, almost 400. Then finally, for the species data, we have distribution and range data that comes from eBird, BirdLife International. We also take in status and abundance data from eBird as well. So as I'll mention at the end, if you are contributing to eBird in any way, that data does come back to our work at the Migratory Bird Initiative. So this is the consolidation of data for the species. Next, we have the consolidation of data for our threats and conservation sites. So for conservation challenges, which is one of the main maps I'll show you, we have 19 hemispheric layers that come into play, including things like agriculture shown here. And we also have 3,200 conservation locations provided by ourselves at Audubon and all of our founding partners. So that's kind of the overview of kind of the Migratory Bird Initiative. Again, we take all this data in, we work really hard with the data communities to try to acquire this data. And then it kind of takes two pathways. One is for our conservation work, and then one is for the Bird Migration Explorer, which I'll go into next. So the Bird Migration Explorer is a first of its kind interactive digital platform, and it combines all these different data types that I was telling you about to do three primary things. The first is to reveal these amazing journeys of these migratory birds. It's also to show us how they connect us to places and people across the hemisphere, and to show us the widespread challenges they face throughout their journeys. I will go into the details of all these next, as well as in the overview for the live demo. So it's important to know that it's in English and in Spanish. You can also find it on any mobile browser. So you can view it on your computer, you can view it on your tablet, you can also view it on your phone's browser. It is not an app, so it's not something you'd find in the App Store, but if you're on your iPhone, you can view it through something like Safari, although it does have kind of reduced functionality for that technology type. And it was designed for two primary audiences in mind. Those are the birders and bird curious, as well as conservation practitioners and conservation advocates. I would imagine that, the folks that are a part of Humana probably fall into both buckets. And ultimately, it's to engage people in the wonder migration. I think as you look through the Explorer, that really helps with that. It's to raise awareness about the broad scale of challenges these birds are facing. It's to show that local actions have hemispheric impact, and to instill a sense of connection and responsibility, stewardship for protecting these places, not only locally where we live, but also far away. So we have three main map types, as I mentioned. This is the first of those. These are our species migration maps. Here we have a Wimbrel example. Now these maps enhance our understanding of the full annual cycle to improve conservation efforts. And they also show a more complete picture of the important places birds use across their full annual cycle. And they can inform important hemispheric outcomes across the hemisphere. Next, we have our location connections maps. These show the places that our local birds depend on and the hemispheric reach of local actions. They show us how we're connected throughout the Western Hemisphere, throughout the Americas, through our shared migratory birds. This example here on the screen shows how Denali National Park is connected through tracked birds, banded birds, and that shows how that connects across the hemisphere to other places. So you can see birds that originate in Denali or travel through Denali that we've tracked or banded have reaches all the way into the northern portions of South America. Then the final map type that we'll go into today on the Explorer are our conservation challenge maps. These help provide kind of planning and policy information that you can dive into for your local actions. So these visualizations combine weekly maps of bird distributions and abundance with the footprint of conservation challenges. So this shows where, when, and how extensively birds are intersecting with kind of human activities and threats. In this example here, we have Lapland longspurs, and we show how they are exposed to oil and gas production areas. This is during kind of the end of April, early May, so you can see them during spring migration and how they're intersecting with these kind of energy production areas. It shows kind of the exposure to the challenge. It doesn't necessarily show the impact on the birds from these threats. And of course, these are just kind of one of the major ways we feel that if you're interested in a kind of a conservation need or a policy need, you can dive into the Explorer and glean some information that can help you with your case. So how can you help? If you're watching this and you're thinking, well, this looks pretty interesting, how can I help? If you're an eBirder, you can contribute your data. Keep contributing to eBird. It's very valuable. That data definitely comes into the Explorer. Volunteer with banding stations. Obviously, banding stations need all the help they can get. And then if you know of anybody that is tracking birds, tracking raptors in this case, please connect us with them if you can. Now, for raptors, we have reached out to a lot of folks. We probably know the scene pretty well, but if there's someone you think we're missing, if you're on the Explorer and you see somebody's data is not there, let us know. There is a chance we've reached out to them and they didn't contribute data for whatever the reason. There's a whole multitude of reasons why folks don't contribute data. So if you don't see their name, it doesn't necessarily mean we didn't reach out to them, but still, let us know nevertheless. Use the Explorer, become advocates for conservation issues, share the Explorer with your friends, your colleagues, and of course, if you're using it, tell us how you're using it. Those test cases really help us out. And then connect with us. On the Explorer, there's options and opportunities to take action, sign up to the Audubon flock, as we say, and then we have some learning resources that you can look at as well. So these are some of the main ways that you can help with our work at the Migratory Bird Initiative. So I'm going to switch out of this presentation for a second, and then we're going to do a live demo of the Bird Migration Explorer. And just confirming, Julie, I can see you. Thumbs up that you can see the Explorer. Great. So here's the Bird Migration Explorer. I'm going to turn away from the camera for a bit, just so I can see what I'm working on. So you can reach this through explore.audubon.org, and it'll take you right to the Bird Migration Explorer. This is the home page. This map that you see here is our Migrations Journeys map, and this is all the data that we've aggregated into the Explorer, viewable in one place. Now, when you first get here, things are kind of grayed out, ghosted out. Just click on the map. It'll ask you to load the interactive map. You don't need to do this, but this makes for more of an interactive experience. So you can load this, and you can see the data is loading. We've worked hard to make this as quick as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of data that comes in. It deals, how quick it works deals with your connections and some of your own technologies on your devices, but it should be relatively quick. Now, as you come in and you pan around, you're going to see that all of these lines are highlighting up, popping up as you're moving your cursor around. And what this is showing you is kind of whatever the track is that you are highlighting over. So each of those colored lines is a different track for a bird that we've taken the data in for. So here you can see a rough-leg hawk telemetry data that's come in from Doppler satellite PTT tags. And you can see that pathway popping up. If you choose, you can click on this and it'll take you to the rough-leg hawk page, but you don't have to, that's not the only way you can access this. So you may feel like this is really overwhelming. There's a lot of data here. How do you begin? There are other access points, but we want to show this because it shows the breadth of the data that's out there and the breadth of the data that we've taken in. And of course, all our maps are interactive, so you can zoom in to your particular area of interest. And then as you see the map layers portion, the panel on the top right, it shows you how you can kind of filter things down. One other thing I want to show as you're cursing along is you'll see that some of these lines that are popping up have different thicknesses, these grayed lines. So we have a GPS satellite tag here for turkey vulture showing. You can see it's a relatively narrow line. That's because it's more precise. We have a more accurate estimation of where that bird was in time and space. If we go through and we get to this light level geolocator track for Prothonotary warbler, you can see it's really wide, it's really huge. And that's because that bird is somewhere within that range based on the technology type. It's as best as the technology allows us to do. So as you're going through, understand that level of precision. So orienting ourselves beyond that main map and some of the information that you can see here, I want to point you to the main toolbar going across the top, which provides bird species locations and conservation challenge map access. Those are also available on the left in these red kind of buttons here. Now, the Audubon logo, for when you're exploring around, if you click this logo, it is essentially returning back to this page. This is your home page. So you can access these three map types across the top or from the home page on the left. Looking at the Migration Journeys map layer on the top right, again, this shows you all the different types of data that we've taken in. And what we've done is we've binned these up more or less taxonomically. So, we have all our land birds kind of aggregated together with the green tracks, et cetera. You can turn these all on and off as you desire. Here I'm leaving raptors on the screen so you can see all the main raptor data that we've taken in. You can see their pathways, which is really, really awesome to see. And one of the coolest things is that we've taken these data and we removed the base map from below before. So we've taken these data and just basically put it down without kind of, the geography of the Americas underneath. And it's really cool because you can see effectively the outlines of the continents, some of the major islands, major mountain ranges, just through these bird tracks. So you can see kind of how they're utilizing these landscapes. One thing to note at the bottom, we have a data providers panel. And this shows us all the data that's on a given page's map. So we've done a really good job about showing where the data has come from, what the data sources are. We've cited them to the the preferences for the data who have, from the contributors whose data they are, just to make sure that folks know these are the folks that you can interact with for these data if you want to try to access them. We do not distribute data from these folks. So if you're thinking you'd like to have some of these data for yourself, you'll have to go to those data holders in the same way we do. We have that built into our data sharing agreement, so we don't give out that data, but you can see what these data sources are. It's a really great resource when it comes time to maybe looking into what you can do if you're a researcher or a student. This is a great resource here. So this panel is always here in the bottom right. And another thing I want to show is that in some of these panels, you can add more details with the show or hide descriptions opportunity. So here for these, you can show what the descriptions are for each of these, or you can hide them for a more simple layout. The final thing I want to show is, and I'll show this on the other maps more specifically, but we have this share map button here. It's kind of the box with the arrow pointing up. So if you want to share these maps out, whether they're to colleagues, they're to your bird curious aunt, they're maybe for a politician or somebody you want to kind of really show the impacts of things, you can share these maps out, and there's great opportunities for that. So this is the main homepage as we're coming in. As you go to the top right, we also have what's known, I'll show it again, is this hamburger menu. It's what they call these 3 stacked bars. It gives you more opportunities here to see and learn about the Bird Migration Explorer. For instance, you can see about the Bird Migration Explorer. And this is kind of effectively all the behind the scenes stuff about the Explorer, about the Migratory Bird Initiative. You can see a list of who our supporters are, our partners. You can read about them. Importantly, you can find out about the data providers. So we've listed out all the institutions that have provided data to us, as well as all the individual studies that we've taken in. I think we put this into a Word document once, and it was like almost 80 pages worth of information. So we've gone through great care to really provide that information for everybody. So there's all this information here about the different map types. There's a learning resources page. We have kind of tutorial videos here if you don't remember what I was telling you. If you want to learn more about resources for young explorers, you're a teacher, you have kids, we have things that we developed with Audubon Adventures for the Explorer. All kinds of stuff you can find in the learning resources page will be helpful for that if that's what you're interested in. And then we have kind of some updates that we put here in our what's new. So this is, again, kind of an about section for the Explorer. Maybe not the funnest part of it, but something that's very critical to understanding how it works and learning more about it in the process of you using it. So again, we're going to hit the Audubon logo. That'll take us back to the home page. So now that we kind of have an orientation for the main home page, let's look at a couple maps. So we're going to go to the bird species button. And here we have all of the bird species that we have in the Migratory Bird Initiative's work listed out for the Explorer. 458. We have a couple feature species at the top, which we kind of pre-select because we think they have really cool and great maps. But there's no shortage of ways to filter down to whatever species you want. You can, of course, look through alphabetically. You can scroll through, see if your species is here. You can change this to taxonomic if you want, if that's more of how your mind works. You can search for it in the search bar. And then you can also filter down. So there's plenty of filterings that you can do. So you can filter down, for instance, to, let's see here, diurnal raptors. And other than the featured species, which remain at the top, it shows you all the raptors that we have. One thing that you should note is that it shows if the bird is tracked or not. We have this tracked icon that's kind of blinking back and on and off again. What that means is that we have tracking data on the Explorer on our maps for that species. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't see it, a species hasn't been tracked at all. Again, there's some data that we haven't taken in. So for instance, greyhawks, I know that there's some folks doing greyhawk work, but that data, we haven't gotten that in. Some of it's maybe not applicable to us based on the movements that they're studying. But this is a good way to see what's available for you as you're going through. So there's many different ways that you can filter down by group, by your location, what technologies were used, the conservation status. conservation statistics, what conservation challenges. So if you want to filter down to raptors that maybe, are impacted by wind turbines, you can see what that intersection of their exposure is. So there's no shortage of ways that you can filter this down. So we'll go to Swainson's hawk. We'll pull that one up. That was one of our featured species. These maps will always start kind of centered on the range, the hemispheric range of a species, to show you that whole range. It also has a time bar slider on the bottom. That time bar slider always starts in the week of the year that we currently are in. So when it starts up, I know it begins right away, but it's showing you kind of always the current snapshot of the year. Now, this may be confusing, but these are not live tracks. These are not birds as they're obviously happening now. These are data from the past that have been taken in and kind of aggregated across a standard year, right? So here we see all these yellow dots that are kind of migrating out of the American West, coming through Mexico, Central America, and then down into the wintering grounds, the non-breeding grounds at that time of year. So I'm going to pause this here because I know it can be distracting with all the yellow dots. And I'm just going to show you kind of what these data points are that are coming in. So looking at the maps, we'll start at the bottom here. We have species range by season. Again, you can turn this on or off. All of this is toggleable. The green is our summer range. The blue is the non-breeding range. And yellow is kind of the year-round range for that species. We don't show migratory ranges like the way some field guides might, because we show that through other means of these maps moving. Next, if we are to zoom in, we can see these brown dots that are in these hexagons. These brown dots are effectively abundance of that bird in that week, relative abundance based on eBird data. So as the weeks progress, these are weekly snapshots, birds are migrating, more people are seeing increases of birds in other places, that dot's getting larger. That's effectively showing you how migration is happening. So this is relative abundance of that species based on eBird data. So if you've supplied eBird data to the platform, it's found its way into us. So thank you once again. So I'll turn that off for a second, and we'll leave these dots playing here. So what we have here is we have these yellow dots, which are showing individually tracked birds of a high precision technology type. So these are either GPS points, satellite points, and you can see these birds moving through. Now, if you're thinking, geez, this is moving so fast, I can't really see what's happening, you can pause the slider at the bottom, and if you want, you can grab the slider bar and you can move it around. So you can zoom in, you can zoom out, pan around, and you can really see how these birds are migrating through these different areas. You can also expand these bars out. So if you want to take a snapshot across, there's these migration bars at the top. They're a little bit darker. You can span that out. And so what that does is that shows you kind of across the whole migration season where these birds range. So you can put that into motion as well. Now, if there is a bird that's tracked through a low precision device, say a light level geolocator, they would have this purple color. And then related to that, we have gap in tracking data. That's related to the low precision data as well. None are showing up here, but that gap in tracking data is because light level geolocators, as amazing as they are, they don't do a good job around certain periods of the year and certain areas like the equator. So it's all based on sunlight. So during kind of our equinoxes and as birds are migrating around the equator, the data is kind of really hard to interpret. And so we just kind of show that we don't know where that bird is effectively. We don't want to try to pin it down if we don't really know. So that's what that's about. And I don't know if we have any raptor data from this to show, but you would see that in something like a bobolink or something with a light level geolocator. Then if you're really interested and you're thinking, well, geez, these birds moving around, I want to see more of the footprint of where they are. You can turn on this journey of a tracked bird function. Let's see here. And it should show ghosted lines of where these birds are. I think it's not showing now because I expanded it out, but if you were to leave it as it was, you would see kind of like a gray footprint of where all those tracks are as those birds are migrating. So this is kind of these maps in a nutshell. Again, you can share these out. You can click the share map icon. You get a link. And then if you have a specific zoom that you're set to, you have anything toggled on or off that you want to share, just click this button here and it shows the specifics of that when you share it out. So you can get the exact map you're looking at to anybody that you're interested through that button. Now on the left, we of course have information that comes in from our online field guide. We have all our conservation statistics that come in for the species. We have related stories that come in that, in this case deals with raptors, Swainson's hawks, and then you can access the different species maps. This is the species map for the kind of the full annual cycle for Swainson's hawks. Here's the other ones that you can access, and then related links. So there's a lot of information here if you're diving in. So we'll show, so this is Swainson's hawks. This is a great species showing out west. I often show broadwing hawks, but maybe we can do something like osprey. Osprey, they have a lot of data. There's been a lot of data that's been done with these birds as well. So you can see raptors are actually very flush with data, between golden eagles, bald eagles, ospreys, broadwing hawks, Swainson's hawks. There's a lot of raptor data that you can look at. So you can see here an example of all these wonderful migrations from this amazing species. And again, all these features transfer across all of them. So what you're learning now is applicable to all species. So that's our bird species maps, our full annual cycle maps. That's the first of these three. I'll show you the locations maps next. Here are our featured locations. In the presentation, I showed you Denali National Park. These are maps that show you how birds connect places. So we have featured locations, just like we have featured birds. We've pre-selected some that we think make really good maps. Here, we can also type in whatever we want. You can type in near me, so you can click this and it'll take you to near where you live based on your location. So we'll just do Cape May, New Jersey. Wonderful migration hotspot, not only for all birds, but raptors as well. And you can see that there's these series of purple hexagons. Now these are our location connections. And as you see here on this color ramp, it shows you the number of tag species that connect locations. So Cape May is highlighted. It's within this hexagon that we've established. And you can see how through tracked birds and banded birds, Cape May connects to other places across the hemisphere. So birds that have been banded or tracked from Cape May or have passed through that hexagon are piped into this, and you can see how that point connects to other locations. Again, you can show descriptions here if you need more information. So you can see, just taking a quick look, that Cape May connects across the entire hemisphere practically, all the way from the northern reaches of Canada and Alaska down to the southern reaches of Tierra del Fuego. Now you can connect to other places. So say you want to connect Cape May down to somewhere in southern Florida. So I connected to Miami, and you can see here that it shows that through birds that we have in our system, Cape May is connected to Miami by 225 tagged birds of 24 species. And so it shows you what those species are. You can load all of them that connect these places together. So it's a really great way to see how your place connects across the hemisphere and what those species are that connect them. You can also, as you're doing this, as you scroll down, you can see conservation connection sites. So you can see what areas around South Florida connect to Cape May through the birds. And you can see additional maps information here at the bottom. So this is a really, really great way to see how these birds are connecting various places from this one origin. Now we'll go to another site here. So we'll do Florida, let's see, Key West. So here's Key West. Julie's in South Florida, right? Key West is, the Florida Keys, great migration spot for a lot of birds. One of the other things I wanted to point out, besides the map's functionality moving around, are these summaries on the left. So you can see where these birds kind of connect to from Key West. Effectively, what are the number of species that connects to given countries, and how many individual birds. So you can see this great summary and just understand that reach a little bit better. Besides just kind of visually, you can kind of get a tabulation of where these birds are going. So this is a great way to kind of learn how your place connects to other places. It's a great way to think about advocacy. Many of us might get calls to action for a place that seems very distant to us, and we might think, well, geez, I have limited funding to help out with conservation issues in my own place, let alone somewhere else. Things like this might help illuminate why those places matter, specifically for birds that you are interested, per se, your quote unquote birds that you might see in your favorite backyard or hawk watch, things of that nature. So it's a great way to look at kind of conservation and advocacy in a new way. So we have our bird species maps. This was our locations maps. The final map type that we are going to show are our conservation challenges maps. So these are the 19 hemispheric layers that I was talking about. We actually have a whole matrix behind the scene filled with, I think, close to 15,000 records of how species are impacted by a conservation challenge. Well, I should say a threat, and then we kind of boil it down to conservation challenges. The reason why we don't say threats on the Explorer is because what is a challenge for some, a threat for some, is not necessarily a threat for others. So thinking about certain species like, songbirds, you might think of forestry, logging as a threat, kind of like typically. But then there are species like golden-winged warblers who benefit from logging and forestry practices. So we think of it as a conservation challenge because there's challenges on both sides about kind of the benefits and the negatives for these things. So we boiled it down to the 19 kind of primary ones that we can show. We can't visualize everything by the nature of the threats, but we can show certain ones. So these are the main ones. And we have them in giant buckets. So we have residential and commercial development, and that can be broken up into urban areas, suburban areas, coastal modification, etc. So you can see as we go down all the different ways that we might view a conservation challenge. Now, you can look at any of these in particular. One of the examples I often show for songbirds is light pollution. And so you can see here how light pollution, the footprint of it across the Americas, you can see it's really pervasive. And we know that a lot of our passerines are nocturnal migrants, so light pollution has big impacts on them during migratory periods. And so you can kind of see here what they might be experiencing. We have a list of the 306 species that are exposed to this challenge, so birds that are kind of through their biologies predisposed to these types of challenges. And also, of course, being in the geographic areas where these challenges are occurring. So this is a great way to kind of look through some of these types of maps. So let's take agriculture, for instance. And, we're constantly working with our team to modify these to make them as accurate as possible. We're also working across the hemisphere with partners to make sure that we have the correct kind of visualization through places like South America. So for instance, here, we can go through with, what did I choose again? Agriculture. And we can scroll through and we can choose a raptor in this case. So we can show kind of how American kestrels are intersecting with this challenge. So this is them through time, and the exposure level is pretty constant. So some birds, you see this exposure level changes. We have these histograms on the bottom. So this shows you kind of where these birds are intersecting with this challenge. You can zoom in and you can see this exposure level here on the right from how unlikely they are within a hexagon to be exposed to that to how very high likelihood that they are on the right. So the darker the dot, the higher the exposure, and then the larger the dot, the more abundant the bird is in that area. So if it's a dark dot, that's big. There's a lot of birds being exposed to that challenge. If it's a smaller dot, that's pale. Very few birds are in that area, and there's a little challenge for them to be exposed to. And the final thing I'll say for this is, as we have these maps here, we selected American kestrel. We can go down here on the left, and we can see all of the other 6 conservation challenges that kestrels, through our work, we have, kind of intersecting with that challenge. So it's a really great way. You can kind of come at it from all different angles to see what these maps are doing. And again, through all this, we can take and come back to the home screen. So I will say, I know we're at time because we want to take some Q&A. I will say that I know this is a fire hose of information. There's a lot of stuff here, not only about how MBI was formed and how we produce the Explorer, but also how to use it. Again, if you go to their Explorer and our About pages, there are learning resources that include YouTube videos with tutorials. So if you missed anything, you can go back to those YouTube videos. You can even just Google, how to use the Bird Migration Explorer. That will probably come up. And you will see kind of everything I did again in a video that you can pause and go back to. So there's a lot of information here, but we hope it is something that's interesting and of use to everybody, not only for discovering the wonder of migration, but also for dealing with conservation work as well. So just coming back into the presentation here, we have some information that I'll leave up for a second regarding the Migratory Bird Initiative and how you can contact us. So you can contact us at migratorybirds@audubon.org. I'm the primary person that deals with those emails. So if you reach out there, I'll be dealing with those emails. I also have a personal email that I can share if you contact me this way. You can reach us at birdmigrationexplorer.org. That's the Explorer in English, or exploraves.org for Spanish. And let's see here. With that, I have just one final slide. This is kind of looking forward for your future series for Humana. So this is what's coming up next month.
Great.
So
Wow.
thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chad. You can back up a slide if you want and just share your
Sure.
links there. Keep that slide up for now if you want through the question period. But wow, my mind is blown. And that clearly just so much work that has gone into making this all happen. What impressive conservation and outreach tools these are. It's just amazing to see all these different tracking methods and tools being used, working together. So I'm blown away, really. And I think you did an excellent job explaining everything, all these programs, and I'm excited to play around with it. It's good to know there's some tutorials out there that people can play around with. I will let Jess see if there's any questions that are coming in. So we have a few minutes still, so people feel free to write your questions in that you have for Chad.
Yeah, sure. Looks like we have one where someone had asked, what makes a year a standard year when considering a migratory path, especially when weather and a changing climate may act as a driver for movement?
Yeah. So when I said standard year, I think what I was referring to is the fact that, birds are tracked across different calendar years effectively, right? So, you might have a bird that has 11 years worth of tracking data, or 16 months of tracking data, and birds are tracked in different years, year to year to year. So, some birds may have been tracked in 2015 or 2010. So just the standard year is just effectively saying from January 1st to December 31st. And so we're just kind of like slicing that up across that time frame and then putting it together into the same year display visualization. But the point is made, right, about how do these birds migrate? Obviously, they're all facing different things as they do, right? They're facing different weather patterns, all kinds of variables. So that is kind of captured in their individual pathways, but everything is aggregated together. So you can't necessarily go in through the Explorer and say, well, I was aware that, maybe there was massive wildfires out west. How did that impact our birds? That'd be harder to tease out through the Explorer. Now, through the back end, we can certainly probably look at those data, look at the dates, try to figure that out if we wanted. But for the visualizations, yeah, I'm just kind of referring to January 1 to December 31st.
Great, thank you. Another question was, have you considered using the data from that Jimenez Winter Raptor Survey generates? Volunteers go out in the field each year and mark the locations of wintering raptors.
Yeah, so I suspected that question might come up, as well as, what about hawk count data? And I worked at the Pac-Man-Monadnock Raptor Observatory in 2018 as the Hawkwatch counter. So, I've obviously familiarity with some of Humana's data sets and just the general like hawk community, or raptor community, I should say. And yeah, so when the Explorer was being built, we had to kind of tackle like, what do we bring in? How do we visualize it? What are the questions we're looking to answer? Aside from, that type of community science program, there's also all the community science programs that like Audubon does or Audubon partners do. The Christmas bird count, Great Backyard Bird Count, which just passed, Climate Watch, which just passed for the spring, or the winter, I should say. So yeah, so all those were considered, and ultimately we had to kind of dial it back to something that created a platform that we could work with for the questions that we had or what we wanted to display. It was considered. I don't know that it's fully off the table, but we have talked about it before, about how do we do this. I think there's a lot of great questions that can come from that, a lot of great information that can come from that. Perhaps for some of those abundance maps, like maybe those can be put into the abundance maps to show kind of like where birds are being seen. So, long story shorter, it's effectively, it was considered, but we decided that we wouldn't do it based on creating kind of the tightest package possible, and really relying heavily on the tracking data where we could. So who knows? It might happen in the future, but at the moment, it's not being considered.
Okay, someone else had asked, can you explain a little more about what qualifies as a threat, using kestrels as the example? Is the type or scale of agriculture considered a threat in this case?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the kestrel kind of the literature fully. It's not. There's a lot of data, as I said, 15,000 records to go through. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the process. So like right now, we're working on a paper that's looking at kind of some of the stuff for warblers, and we're looking to do a manuscript that's in process, seeing what are some of the limiting factors for warbler populations and trends. And so what happens is we will do, there's literature that's out there. We've done an exhaustive literature research. Some of that might be, there might be something out there for kestrels. This is hypothetical, but maybe there's something out there that says, kestrels are negatively impacted by agriculture of this scale or of this type in these regions. And so we kind of take that information and we put it back into our matrix, and we kind of qualify it. Is that a threat to them? Is that impacting them based on things like, is it direct mortality? Is it reducing how effective they are as breeders? Is it changing the habitat? Is it altering the habitat? Is it destroying habitat? All those types of things. And we kind of have these different buckets, and then those buckets kind of get pulled together, and then we have this kind of agricultural kind of challenge that you see, which is, it's this whole tree, this whole matrix that kind of comes together. And so, yeah, so for anything like if you look at kestrels and you look at agriculture, what you're effectively seeing though is, are they exposed to something that might be a threat? So the literature says probably yes, that's why it's included. And then what happens is we show the abundance of kestrels against kind of this hemispheric footprint of agriculture. And that data, that latter data is publicly gleaned, agriculture, or any of those conservation challenges, and they're intersected together. So you'd have to dive into the literature itself to kind of see what are the impacts moving forward. So those maps are really just, are kestrels exposed to it and to what level? You kind of have to kind of do the next steps yourself. I hope that answers
Great.
it.
Someone else had asked, is it possible to see the effects of H5N1 avian influenza using Explorer? Is infectious disease on the radar for this program?
Again, it's something that we've talked about, and we do have we have, out of those 15,000 records, if something, we do have things like disease, we do have things like pests, we have all kinds of things, fire exposure and flooding, groundwater depletion, like any type of thing that impacts birds. If it's in the literature for our migratory species, we've taken it in. At the moment, there is no plan that I'm aware of to try to map anything regarding avian influenza and birds' exposure to it. Part of that, I think, is just the feasibility of that is such a dynamic thing that we don't really update our Explorer even remotely on that time scale to make that kind of really of any use. And there's better resources probably out there about what's happening. And I'll just add that regarding the updating of our platform, we're actually coming up on our next update. So we launched in September of 2022. We've had several updates now. I think we're kind of on a semi-annual path. So we kind of update the Explorer visibly every 6 months or so, and everything kind of gets updated. So if we get new tracking data, that's kind of going to be showing up. And then other things are updated annually, just because like, the eBird data, I think, is an annual thing. The USGS data is an annual thing. It's a lot of data to kind of manipulate. So we update it constantly and things are kind of always evolving. But yeah, no, avian influenza is not something that we are currently mapping. And, I can probably safely say we probably won't.
Okay, great. Somebody else had asked, could scanning, like Birdcast does for nocturnal migration, be used to track foul weather diversions of broadwing hawks when they divert from usual migration pathways, like at Pack, Monadnock?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't think the Explorer would be the tool for that, but yeah, I think that's possible, right? There's a lot of, when it comes to migration science, there's a lot that's happening right now. Birdcast is wonderful. I know some of the folks that are involved with that. And there's more and more real-time alerts. And then there's also a lot of kind of armchair enthusiasts that are figuring things out, just because there's such a proliferation of data that's out there. So some folks are tracking migration or predicting migration based on weather patterns that are happening. I mentioned, or I should say, it was mentioned at the top of the call that things like vagrancy is something that interests me. And I do know that, like, for instance, there's enthusiasts, there's birders, there's people who are interested in vagrancy. They'll look at weather patterns and predict kind of what's happening and try to view that in kind of near real time. So, there may be certain weather patterns coming out of Northern Europe across the North Atlantic that's likely to blow vagrants across to our side of the pond, as it were. And, some folks will go to places like Newfoundland and such to look for, European oystercatcher, European golden plover, things that they predict, lapwings, based on the timing of the birds, where the birds should be intersecting with weather. So I think, looking at that, you might be able to make some predictions. But but man, is it tough. And you know, we just never know sometimes like what's really causing the changes that we might see. Having worked at PAC and now living in Vermont, you know, I see kind of the differences between Pac-Monadnock and Putney Mountain, two hawkwatch sites that aren't that different in space, but sometimes there's that annual variation that happens, and it's a fun thing, a fun exercise to try to figure it out, but not always possible.
Okay, I think that's it for questions.
Great.
But thank you so much, Chad. That was such an informative presentation. Really great. And we really appreciate you speaking to us. If you want to go to the next slide, I can
Sure.
talk about next month. I wanted to mention that as we know, migration season is upon us. There's already a few sites reporting on hawkcount.org, so you can check out reports there. And that means Raptorathon season is here. So through March through May, Humana runs Raptorathon, which is like a birdathon, and you can create your own team and go out for a great day of birding. And half of what you raise goes to Humana programming and supporting the network of watch sites. The other 50% goes to whichever hawkwatch you want or conservation organization. So if you're interested, you can go to humana.org/Raptorathon and learn more about that. We have a conference coming up this fall, which you may have heard of. It's our big 50th anniversary conference in Duluth, with partnering with Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory. That's going to be November 7th through the 10th. So we're going to be getting registration out on that this spring. So we're working hard to get details in place and all our raptor researchers lined up. We also have a new tour available in late September that you can check out on our website, humana.org, and that's checking out golden eagles during peak migration out in Montana in late September, early October. So that one we just got up online. And next month for our Lunch and Learn on the 27th of March, we're going to be hearing from Nora Honkamp. So she's going to be talking about her research, which focuses on raptor migration timing in relation to climate change. So as always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much for all the support, whether it's joining Lunch and Learns, whether it's counting hawks, contributing to these programs that are making programs like Chad's program possible. You know, even some of the Hawkwatch data that may not directly be going into Chad's programs is linked to eBird. So some of that eBird data is hawk count data is being used overall. So thank you for whatever you're doing. I always encourage people to consider Humana memberships, which make our programming possible and presentations like this possible. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next month.